What's up, and welcome to Groundbreaking, a friendly original podcast celebrating and sharing the stories of young creatives across the music industry who are embarking on and writing their own journeys. Each episode, we feature a new up-and-comer, discuss their work, and make sure we leave you with a takeaway too. I'm Jake Brewer. Let's get started. I have an incredible guest for you today and a conversation I'm so excited to be sharing because I sat down with my new friend, Lindsey Lerner, the host of the podcast Learning with Lerner. She's an entrepreneur and tour manager who focuses all of her passions into building community. Lindsey really navigates and finds fulfilling solutions to the small things within being a creative that can be really hard to overcome. We talk about Lindsey's projects, including the Mobile Social Club, what people need to find community, and share how some of the best collaboration comes from combating that self-inflicted isolation that I know sometimes I feel when working creatively. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Groundbreaking. I am so glad that you are listening to this episode today. This is one that I really am looking forward to. And what I love so much about this podcast is it kind of gives me an excuse to have one-on-one time with people that I think are so interesting and so passionate about what they do. And their energy is just so infectious that I think if you are somebody who is also kind of infectiously inspired, this is a perfect episode for you to listen to today. Not only does our guest have background in essentially everything, our guest also does it all so incredibly well that it's intimidating in the best possible meaning of that word. So anyway, Lindsey, I will sing you praises day in, day out, all the time. But and we haven't even known each other for that long, but I'm really looking forward to today's episode and asking you a ton of questions that I just want to know from you personally, and hopefully some others listening will be able to learn something too. But without any further ado, Lindsey Lerner, welcome to Groundbreaking. I say that with the biggest virtual hug I could possibly send.
Thank you so much for having me, Jake. I'm so stoked to be here.
Okay, great. Because I am about to ask you everything that
I'm ready.
I don't know, you're probably going to block my number after this because I am just so in awe, I think, of the way that you create community. And I think I love that word, but I do think it gets thrown around a lot in with the best intentions. Like, you know, if somebody wants to create a community, that's usually a great thing. But I do feel like you execute and follow through with that in a more rare kind of way. And I mean that really well. I tend to word things not in the best
I
way,
appreciate
but
it.
Again, everything's so well intentioned. But I want to focus our conversation today on how I think, especially lately, like I have like feelings of like creativity can be so isolating. And usually when you're being like in a more personal level creative,
Sure.
and I think usually on the show we're applying this to a music kind of industry creativity, but I really think today's conversation can be applied to any sort of creativity out there, which is why I'm really excited about it, and I think people are going to learn a ton of things. But I want to start here, and I'm going to start here, and then we're going to go back, and then we're going to jump forward. That's usually how this goes.
Amazing.
But I want to start by asking you the tough question of like, why do you value community? And was there a certain point that you realized that was something that either you like needed to be fulfilled or something that you just thrived in and wanted to create?
Sure. Ugh, great question. Diving right in.
Yeah.
I think for me, my existence, so it feels on this earth, is really about connecting with people and then connecting other people. That's always what I've loved to do since I was a little kid. And it's had different iterations over the course of my life, whether it showed up and manifested in photography and then in music and then in startups and tech. And but for me, it's always, my resume reads like a complete dumpster fire. And anytime that I've applied to get any sort of job, I have not gotten said job since people look at it and they're like, what is happening? And for me, from an outsider's perspective, it absolutely looks very confusing. And it's like, what the hell is going on? But the underlying intention is always that community-based value of,
Mhm.
well, how do I make, how do I know not just Jake in this dimension? Like, obviously, I know you're a musician. Great. And what else?
Yeah.
And what are the things that you're really pants on fire excited about that somebody else that I may know may be pants on fire excited about? And sure, you might both be musicians, but if you can connect on that deeper level, that's what's going to transcend everything.
Yeah. That's a great answer. And it gets me kind of thinking about how I think especially it almost kind of feels like it works backwards, where I feel like in any sort of creative industry now, it's valued to be multifaceted,
Mm.
but we still have that desire to be like singularly labeled at the same like time, which I know is something. And I will say, like, I think I only can put that thought together because of what I've learned from you, because that is something that
Mm.
ever since I like first heard your name, like I felt like has been preached about, like
Mm-hmm.
there are so much to some, and like it seems so like counterintuitive to like,
Totally.
because like of course it's so much easier to be like I'm a like musician, like because then that's just easily digestible and people aren't
Mm-hmm.
scared to comprehend like what I
Right. But
do.
that's it.
But like
It's a fear-based thing.
yeah,
And that's what sucks.
and that, but I'm like, that's not, and it almost feels like I'm not doing myself justice by just being that like
Mm.
simple either, because I have so many, I mean, we are talking here today not because I love music and love being a musician, but
Right.
because we share so many other values that aren't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily defined
Totally.
in just that. And you have an amazing podcast too, and of course I'm going to be plugging that, like everything, and I'll include all of that in the description and everything. But like, you are so much more than a podcast host, and
Mm-hmm.
I think it's so like I don't think anybody's going to argue with us that that exists, but
Right.
like nobody's really working to find the solution except for you. And so I love your definition of community, because I think when I asked you that question, like I noticed you didn't really say I a lot. Like
Mm.
you mentioned me and you mentioned somebody else that you know that would have like this. You talked about building community around you, not putting yourself
Mm.
into a community. And I
Mm.
think that was something that really just is the perfect example of why I think you understand and execute community so well.
Mm.
Do you find that, is there any sort of discrepancy in that, the way people want community, but then like maybe are hesitant to be a part of one?
Yes. 100%.
Okay,
And
and
I
why
think,
is
you
that?
hit the nail on the head. All of this circles back to what you said a few minutes ago about people being scared. And it's scared of themselves, it's scared of other people. And so it's very easy for people to navigate through the world saying, okay, great. Jake, musician. Lindsey, podcaster. So and so, doctor. So and so, marketer. Okay, great. And it's easy to put blinders on and just to go and to go and to go. It's way more difficult and way more time consuming and
Yeah.
energy consuming to not have blinders on and be like, oh, wow, there's so many different ways in which to view the world. But I would argue we're all, too busy, quote unquote,
Yeah.
to really take anything else in. And I think in order to build a genuine community, in order to build a genuine connection with somebody, you need time, you need space, and you need the energy to do so. And so there's a lot, especially now. There's massive amounts of commodification of community in this. Pre-COVID, but especially post-COVID,
Mhm.
because everyone has been isolated. They feel lonely. They're scared. They're nervous. They've been locked up in their apartments or their houses for so long, and now they're finally getting out. And it's an easy way to bring people into a space, but it's much more difficult to get people to stay.
Yes. What what gets people to stay then?
Mm.
Is it recognizing somebody for not just that a singular introductory label, or what they do, or like really like their career? Like that's usually the first
Mm-hmm.
question that we ask people, is what do you like do
Totally.
for like work, not really like what you
Right.
enjoy doing.
Oh, for sure.
Does community take more than understanding that?
I think so. You can have different types of communities, and there's definitely communities built around career centric vibe, whatever, whatever. There's a community for CMOs and CFOs and CTOs and all of those things, and that's great. And there's obviously a time and place for that, and you want to feel seen and heard and understood from a technical work perspective. 100%. Like there's a time and a place for that, but the community that I was seeking personally, am seeking to create on more of a personal level, is a space where you can forget all of that and just bring who you are. And if
Yes.
you don't know who that is, that's also fine. And I think more of us need to admit that we don't know that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this is the perfect time for me to ask, like, just tell us about Mobile Social Club and about how you are just executing everything you're saying so perfectly. So
Mm.
for anybody listening that doesn't know, tell us all about that.
For sure. Yeah. So I started the Mobile Social Club a couple months back. This was, I mean, more than a couple months back, which was born out of the podcast that you mentioned earlier, Learning with Lerner. And on that podcast, I'm able to meet with some of the incredible people that I've met throughout the years, very similar to this podcast where you've been able to meet people through
Mm-hmm.
work, through fun, through play, and then you get to sit down and dive a little bit deeper. And that's basically what I do all day, and finally recorded it and put it out in podcast form. And we had folks who were hitting us up saying, listen, it's really, really great that you get to talk to all of these people and they're doing all of these cool things and they have businesses and they're touring artists and they have startups and whatever. But how do I do that? And how do you meet people who also want to do that? And I was like, I personally just like have been harassing people on the internet for a decade plus, but like, if you don't want to do that, totally get it.
Yeah.
And someone who listens, who knows me on more of a personal level, mentioned, they were like, listen, like, you've done events your whole life, like, get it together and start hosting people. I'm like, okay, sure. Yeah, that sounds like a something.
Yeah, it's not
And
that
at
simple,
first,
but sure, yeah.
yeah, right. I was like, sure. And at first, I started out hosting a handful of live podcasts, which was fun, but it wasn't necessarily the fulfilling thing that I think anybody was looking for. People who were there, they listened, they were very attentive, they were very sweet, but then they spent the rest of the time talking to everyone else who was in the room, which was great. And I was like, I don't think we need the podcast. This is really
Yeah.
kind of irrelevant. And so removing myself and removing the podcast element out of it, I was like, well, what else? What else needs to be there? And for me in my personal life, I am a total movement geek.
Uh-huh.
Any sort of things that's athletic or outdoors related or movement related, I love. And so that was stuck out in my head of like something that's really, really important that makes me feel good as a person and able to navigate the world. Having meaningful conversations with people is also like my main reason for existing. And so obviously part of the podcast, part of having this
Yeah.
conversation is super important. And then music, I mean, I started my career, if we're talking about careers, I started my career in the music industry, and so music has always been something deeply, deeply important to me. And so I had a thought of like, well, what happens if you have an event that combines all three? And so movement, meaningful conversation, and music, I was like, I don't know what the hell kind of event that is. I know that it's not a yoga class, it's not a lecture, it's not a concert, it's not.
Yeah.
And I think that was very confusing for a lot of people for a while, but now that there's enough buzz around it where people are like, oh, well, okay, it sounds interesting, so I'll go, or their friends bring them or something like that, it's easier. And so now people are coming, and the resounding feedback every single week is, I didn't know I needed that.
Mm. Yeah, because
And I'm like, yes.
how would you,
Great.
when nothing like it exists, we always, like, I guess I think the solutions to those problems that you're that you're aiding here for those folks is like, we only really think of solutions that we know exist. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's really hard to think
Totally.
creatively about solutions because it's not the easiest and quickest solution. And I can speak for
Right.
myself. I'd much rather have the easiest, quickest solution because problems and ambivalence make me so uncomfortable. So I'm going to go for the
Yes.
quickest and most convenient one. But that's not always
Totally.
the best one. I
Mm-hmm.
definitely want to I have so many questions for you, and I'm putting all the pins in those. But I do want to backtrack and ask you
Sure.
about your tour managing days and kind of
Mm.
what lessons, because I mean, what a unique experience to, like, putting on an event is insane of it,
Totally.
but let alone like doing it every single night and
Mm-hmm.
moving, like. And I would
For
love for
sure.
you to talk about the tour that you did earlier this year too,
Mm-hmm.
because I think, I mean, you probably took so much that you learned with that. I
Totally.
have a lot to ask you there, but tell us, like, I guess first, like, what kind of got you like into that, and like what
Sure.
were the immediate like ohs, like, I am so glad I learned this, because
Yeah.
there's so many things within that world that you just have to learn through experience,
For sure.
that I want you to at least
Oh,
tee up for
totally.
people.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually wild, and you don't have to include this in the episode, but a buddy of mine that I got connected to within the last couple of years, He's a production and tour manager and front of house, and he just came out with a book and he mailed it to me, and I read like the first like 40 pages this morning, and I was like, where the fuck was this a decade ago, man? Like, are you kidding me? So I will be singing his praises, and I'll shoot you the link so you can
Yes.
you can
Wait,
check it out too,
what's the
because
book? What's the book?
it's called The Efficient Hustle.
Okay. Amazing. I'm leaving this in the episode
Yeah,
because
it's amazing, and it's, you know, it's like literally everything that I wish I had known, because I didn't know tour managing was a job. I had no idea. I've always loved traveling, but I didn't realize that you could travel for music, you could travel for work, you could get paid to do these types of things. And in during undergrad, I had a business that was called Level Exchange, and at the time it was an online booking platform that connected local musicians to local bars, coffee shops, and restaurants. And I was running around Rhode Island. Rhode Island does not really have a music industry because we're so close to New York and everyone just leaves.
Sure.
There was really no one was hanging around, and the musicians who were there were wildly talented, but they didn't necessarily have the ambition that they wanted to be, you know, world touring artists. And I was like, okay, so you're getting paid like $5 and a crappy flat beer to play at this bar or this restaurant, and like that doesn't, I don't know, this was just like this like deep like moral injustice. I was like, I must fix this. And set it upon myself to fix that. And then very quickly realized that I had no idea anything about the music industry, like literally nothing. I had just come back from a semester abroad in Chile where I had connected with this kid that I studied abroad with. He fancied himself a hip hop artist. We did a ton of shows somehow in South America. It still baffles me.
Wow.
Like, between our combined knowledge of Ola, my fancy looking camera, and his mild resemblance to Neo, we booked a ton of shows. And then we came back to the States, and he's like, dude, you're so organized. Like, you can be my manager. And I was like, yeah, I can. Okay. And then set out on this crusade of like, I'm going to fix the music industry. And we had like built the online platform that was doing its thing. That was really cool. And then I was like, okay, well, we should do like showcases, and how do we bring more musicians together? And obviously the community aspect, it was like, how do we connect all these dots? And very quickly, like the first show that I hosted, I booked 7 bands, Jake. 7. Why? I don't know. I was like, the more the merrier. This is gonna be great. And we went to this like super shit bar,
which is true. The more the merrier. Maybe not free.
I mean, there was no budget. There was nothing, and like this bar, it's not even open anymore. Like it was pretty rough, but. I got there. Thankfully, I got there early at like, I don't know, like 3 o'clock in the afternoon for like an 8 o'clock show. I'm nervous as hell. And I will never forget, the band started to get there, and somebody was like, cool, like, is the sound guy here? Like, are we going to do sound check?
Oh no.
And I was like,
no.
What?
Yeah.
Oh, you need one. I was like, you don't just like plug stuff in and just nope. Okay, so thankfully there was other very competent people there who were able to figure it out. I was not one of them. I'm good at the bringing people together.
Yeah.
Nothing else.
Yeah, everybody serves a purpose. I've been exactly in that same position as you. Yep. And I'm only silent
hilarious.
because I can't think about it anymore.
Yes.
Yep.
It just, in that moment, it was just like, shit, I don't know anything about this industry. Like, I was just blatantly ignorant throughout this whole process. And so I started emailing managers of artists that I really liked. I don't know. I mean, I was like 18, 19. I was like, obviously someone will answer me. This will be great. And there was this one guy that I was a huge fan of. I found his manager's email online. I assumed that since he was a young 20-something-year-old, that his manager, like my buddy and I, it was probably the same situation, right?
Yeah.
Just no big deal, low-hanging fruit. And so I emailed him, and I had been studying photography at the time, and I thought that could be my foot in the door. I was like, sick. Hey, I take photos. I saw you're coming to House of Blues. You know, I'm only an hour away. And of course, I don't know anything at this point about press passes or like the proper channels to actually go and do that. So I'm just harassing this man. Please pay attention to me, thinking that if I got the foot in the door, then I could be like, by the way, I'm interested in music. Can we work something out?
Yeah.
Long game. And I had tickets to the show already. And the show was like months and months away, like at least 3-4 months away. I'm like, okay, so like there's time. I sent this man, I'm not even going to tell you how many emails. It's truly embarrassing. And probably like a month and a half later, I got a phone call one day from a Los Angeles number. I had like barely left the state. I'm like, who the hell? Los Angeles. Hello? Is this Lindsey? Uh-huh. This is Kevin. Oh. I will never forget. Straight up, he was like, what the fuck do you want? And I was just like,
oh my
oh my
God.
God. And I just like word vomited. I was like, I'm sorry. Thank you for calling me. And I was just wondering if I could take pictures because you're coming. And he was like, dude, one, take a breath. And he was like, it wasn't in a like douchey way, but he was like, basically like, do you know who I am? And I was like, clearly not. And then
You're like,
he
I don't know.
explained
You
to me.
called me. Like,
Right. He kept me on the phone. He was amused by it in some capacity because this man kept me on the phone for over an hour.
Oh my God.
Explaining he's not some young dude. He's in his 60s. He was VP of Live Nation when he was my age. He was head of something or other at, House of Blues.
Sure.
And he booked,
because those realities of then and now are the same. Sure.
I know. And he was like, and when I was your age, like I booked Hendrix and I was hanging out at Clapton's birthday party. And I'm just like, what the, like, okay. And then I learned a lot from that conversation. I learned that managers don't go on the road with their artists. I learned that there's a such thing as a tour manager. Oh, okay. That photographers go on the road. Cool. So I'm clocking all of this, all obviously while internally panicking.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the conversation, he says, but if you're ever in LA, let me know. Okay. I'm like, I literally have never been to LA. Sounds good. So then fast forward a few months, I'm at House of Blues. I have all of my camera gear with me, and I'm dead set that I'm going to go and take photos at this concert. I don't even know. I don't even want to take photos. I just like, somebody is going to pay attention to me.
Yeah.
And one of the side doors was open. I don't know why. I heard sound check. It's like 3:00 in the afternoon. Again, for like a 8-9 o'clock show. Yep. Don't know. Flung open the door, and this like ginormous Latino man was like, sup? And I was like, sup? He's like, you coming in? I was like, yeah. Okay. So I'm standing in the middle of House of Blues. This artist that I'm totally fangirling over is sound checking. I don't even know what to do. I'm like, well, now what? Like, you dumbass, like you got in the door and you have no plan. And so I texted the number that Kevin had called me from. And I said, hey, last minute, or I said, hey, didn't know if you happened to be at the show. Like, thanks so much for taking the time to chat with me. Whatever. Again, months later, None of this is making sense. And he said, last minute, I ended up on the East Coast. I'll be there tonight. Let me know when you get here. I said, okay, cool. I'm at soundcheck. So a few minutes later, this old man comes down. He taps me on the shoulder. He says, are you Lindsey? I said, uh-huh. He goes, how the fuck did you get in here? I was like,
don't worry about it. Yeah.
You need better security, man. Like, I don't know. And then he takes me throughout the whole venue and he's introducing me to people and he's showing me around. And I was like, whoa, like they have a sound guy, like crazy. This is like so wild. This is how you run a show. It was just like blown away. And of course, like I didn't have credentials. I didn't have a pass. I didn't have anything. Yeah. So I got to hang out and like until the show started, then all of a sudden I was like, shit, like I can either stay backstage and like hang or like I got to make a choice because security is just chasing me around at this point.
Yeah.
And then fast forward, this was like months and months. I had sent him like a thank you note and followed up and whatnot. And then months later, he called and he was talking about one of his artists. And he was like, hey, like, I need some help. Like, do you want to help out? And I was like, yep.
Doing
good.
what? Just
no idea. It was literally like help. I was like, yes, sounds good.
Yep, sure.
This is the problem with my career. It gave me like such a false sense of how things work. I'm like, I show up, I do a good job, and then I keep going.
But if you were under that mindset of like, this is what I do, like,
I know.
And even like unintentionally,
it wouldn't have worked.
Like some doors would have just naturally like closed. But I also like, but then did you really, if you didn't fully know what you wanted, why would you close off like anything?
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And so he asked, I said yes. And then one of like the first, like I had worked with this artist for a little while. And then one of the first like things that they had asked was like, hey, like we're going on Warped Tour and I think we have a budget for a bus. And I was like, oh. And he was like, can you like find a tour bus? And of course I'm just like, yeah, I can do that. What? I'm like 20 years old. I don't even know if I was 21 yet. Maybe I was. And I'm just like, okay, yeah, I can do that. And so like Google, obviously,
Yeah.
tour bus, like what the fuck?
Yeah.
I don't even remember how it happened, but I spent enough time searching random things that I stumbled upon a Facebook group for tour bus drivers, because not only do you need a tour bus, you need a driver.
Yep. Yep. That bus isn't going
Eventually,
anywhere without. Yeah.
fast forward, figured out the tour bus situation somehow. Thank you. And then I remember I got an email from the artist, and he was like, "Hey, well, thanks so much for like all your help with this, and like it's been great working together. And well, I mean, we have 12 bunks, and there's only 9 of us. Like, why don't you just come?" And he was like, "You'll just like, you'll do your thing." And I'm like, before it could even register, my fingers are like, "Yes,
Yeah.
send, done." And next thing I know, I'm on a tour bus. It's Warp Tour. And then I'd also clocked like, oh, this is why my parents never let me go to Warp Tour.
Oh,
Got it.
God.
Thanks, mom and dad. And I'm just like, what is happening? And of course, like you said, like I didn't have a role. It was just like, this girl is here. I was getting paid too. So it wasn't like
Wow.
I was just hanging out. It was like I was there, I was getting paid, and everyone on the tour got paid the same. That was like something I respected about that artist. And so most of the band, like the band didn't care. They were like, sick, like you'll help us out whatever we need. But the tour manager at the time was so mad. She was like, what? Who is this bitch? What are you doing here?
Oh,
And I
no.
was just like, I'm just happy to be here. And fast forward, long story short, she went off the rails. I don't know what the problem was. She ended up basically getting herself fired. And they were like, well, you're here. You can do it. And I was like, yeah, okay. And so it is me and 10 boys on a tour bus for the entire summer,
Oh,
like 20,000
my
miles.
God.
And that was my like trial by fire of tour
It
managing.
seems like one of those moments that's like record scratch. Like you're probably wondering like how I got here. Like that.
Oh,
And you're
100%.
probably asking yourself that question
100%.
too of like, what am I
Truly. And
doing?
I was just like, what? And I had, I still had the business, I still had Level Exchange in Rhode Island. So I was like, I mean, it's a good opportunity to meet people in the
Hmm.
industry and whatnot and all of these things. But I was just like, okay, this is what we're doing. Yep. And after that summer, I was like, I can do anything.
Oh
If I
yeah.
can do that, like done. This is it. And then over time, tour managing has always been funny because it's one of my favorite things to do. It's something that pays pretty well. And on top of that, not on top of that, it's just funny because it's like it checks a lot of boxes for me, but it's something that's I like moonlight as. Like nobody really knows. It's just like sometimes like I'll get a text and be like, "Hey, are you free for these couple of months?"
Oh
I'm
my
like,
gosh.
I think I can. Sure. It's never been something that it's like, this is what I do and this is on my resume and this is how we get a job. Like it's so opposite to corporate culture, and
Yes.
that's what cracks me up about it.
Yeah. It's kind of like when like an actor and actress will be like, it's like you
Totally.
have to like. There's nothing consistent about it. Like it is really just like
Exactly.
job after job. Like it's not like you're.
Mhm.
There's no what, oh my God, what am I trying to, I'm trying to think of like a job oh my God, what's the word? Like you can't rely on like the income, job
No. There's no
stability, or yeah.
stability.
Um
No.
that's job security. That's what I'm trying to think of.
Uh,
There's nothing like there. And that's, I mean, what a
No, and even, even if you're on the road with like a huge touring artist, like obviously like Elton John is still touring.
yeah.
And who knows who his tour manager is, but I doubt that it's the same one he started with. I mean, this shit's brutal.
Yeah.
Like there's not many musicians who have that long of a career where you can really make it a stable thing. I think you could do it for, maybe 5, maybe 10 years if you like really get a good match, but it's tough. And you're away.
Yeah.
There's pros and cons to it.
Yeah, constantly. Yeah, and it's not even like an artist where you can like tour for, X amount of months and then,
Mhm.
be stationary and record in, that same studio for however
Exactly.
many months, or where you live, or yeah,
Exactly.
to do your job as a tour manager, you have to be mobile. Like all,
Mhm.
you can't do your job stationary.
100%.
That's so, it's like I knew that, but I never actually like conceptualized that. That's so crazy. So how long? I mean, it sounds like you're still like, if you got a text today and somebody offered you something like amazing that you want to
It's
do,
so hard.
like maybe you
I
would still
know.
do it. But what would you say was like the prime time you were like you're doing that? How many years were you doing that? Like,
It's been like almost 10 years now.
oh my God.
And I think it was last year where I was like, I really like I do genuinely love it, but I have a serious partner now. My daughter is 7, and so it's not that I was gonna say it's not that I don't want to be away from them.
No, I know what you mean. It's okay. I know
And
exactly what you mean.
I don't want to be away from them, but it's also I don't know, it's just like a different, phase of life. And so like in the fall, one of the artists that I worked with was like, "Hey, like we're going on a 3-week run." And I'm like, "That I can do.
Yeah.
I will see you there."
Yeah.
If it's under a month, I'm like, "Hell yeah."
Yeah.
But there's been other times where friends have texted, they'd be like, "Hey, like, we're," and like, I mean, some of the opportunities are sick. It's like, "Hey, do you want to go to Europe for the summer?" And I'm like, "I do." But also like
But also, I do, but you're asking me a different question. Yeah.
yes, exactly. So that's kind of tough. I think I've been fortunate enough to travel to a lot of places, especially for work, which has been great. So now for me, it's more about I want to just travel to these places. I would like to see something other than just a music venue
Yeah.
in a city and then, keep it moving.
Yeah.
And that's why in 2019 and 2020, like through the pandemic, I was a van lifer because I had just been on the road so often and I had been back and forth across the United States a gazillion times. But I was like, cool, I've seen great coffee shops, great music venues, nothing else.
Yeah. Just because you've been to
I
that
was like,
city doesn't mean you've experienced
yeah, I've
it.
driven
Yeah.
by every national park sign. Haven't seen the national parks. I was like, let's go and explore and see something different.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I'm gonna attempt to make a bridge here between the first part of our conversation
Amazing.
of, do you feel like in the settings of, I mean, I'm speaking from very, very minimal experience. You can
Hmm.
speak to this way better than I can. Of in like, I mean, a tour setting is
Sure.
rigorous, and it's like it's
Truly.
so scheduled, and it can feel so like so automated in a way.
Sure.
Um, do you feel like community naturally happens with those who are
Mm.
on touring, because it's like it almost doesn't like, I'm gonna make, I guess this is an assumption of mine that you
Yeah.
can either prove or disprove of.
Sure, sure, sure.
Like it almost doesn't matter. Like, I don't want to say it doesn't matter, like personality type or like anything like that, but
Mm.
it's like you all
Totally.
have this like one massive 24/7 thing in
Mhm.
common, and that's
Totally.
you're on the road and you're all away from home. Like, is that
Yeah,
enough commonality? Where did you learn anything about community in those settings?
for sure. And I think it's interesting because it becomes very clear in those scenarios, like to your point about personalities, it becomes very clear like who gets along, who doesn't, and who values what.
Hmm.
There's been several tours like I got so spoiled. My first couple of tours, like that band, they were all best friends. They all got along.
Oh,
It was fantastic.
yeah,
And it was almost like they were thankfully they were very welcoming and inclusive and included me in that, so it didn't feel awkward. But if they it definitely could have been a situation of like, okay, like you go over there, like mom, do your mom thing,
sure,
and like the kids are over here. Like it could have been that type of situation, but they were super inclusive. Whereas there's been other tours where the act had just popped off a little bit. They had to hire musicians, so they weren't friends. They were,
yeah,
guns for hire who come in who didn't necessarily have the same values. And,
yeah,
fortunately, like, shout out to Verite and her crew of amazing people because, like, that is the only band that I've toured consistently with that has never felt like babysitting or nagging or anything like that. They are professional, they're on time, they're courteous, and they all give a shit in some capacity about like health and wellness and their overall well-being.
yeah,
It's not like there's been other acts where it's like, "Oh my god, I feel like crap." And I'm like, "Dude, I've only seen you eat flaming hot Cheetos for 2 weeks. Like, obviously
yeah,
you're gonna feel like crap." Versus on like the Verite tours, it always cracked me up because it was like, let's make sure we find a hotel next to a Whole Foods. And
yeah.
it's like, sounds good.
Wow. Yeah, because it's such an extreme circumstance to be living under. You almost have to
Hmm.
like, um it's like weird because I guess you would think you'd have to be kind of like flexible and like, be able to like endure more, but
Totally.
you really like actually should just be prioritizing. And it's hard to do that. Like to think like, did I
Hmm.
eat a full lunch today. And like I've
For
been
sure.
guilty of that, of like, oh, I have to go like play and I don't think I've had a meal today. Like,
Right.
and it's like, then you're not doing anybody service, because one, that's not
Exactly.
the best show, but two, also I'm so grumpy and no one
Totally.
else is happy to be there, because I'm
Exactly.
there. Um,
Yeah, man.
it's
I think that's the thing too, is like the best compliment that I ever get on tour is, damn, like that truly felt like a vacation where we played shows.
oh yeah,
And I'm like, yes, like that is now that I've been able to do that multiple times, that is what I strive for. And that is all done very intentionally. And that to me like ties back to the community. It's about, and that can happen on one-off tours where I don't have a relationship with the act, but it definitely happens in situations where I know the act on a more personal level, and I
yeah.
know, what are their dietary preferences, what are their activity preferences, what do they want to do on an off day, what do I want to do on an off day, and then things down to, there was one tour where literally every single hotel that we booked within walking distance of a rock climbing gym. And everyone who was, it was a huge touring party, there was like 20 of us, and the kids who gave a shit about it were like, this is awesome. Nobody else even noticed, but the
Yeah,
people who were in the band who gave a shit about it were like, oh man, this is dope. I'm like, I know.
yeah.
Let's go.
That's
And then it takes, it's I think it's tour managing too, and like the biggest skill from it, and I think honestly the reason why I get incredibly frustrated a majority of the time is because tour managing has made my decision making so rapid, like all the time. It's just constantly either problem solving, putting fires out, and or having to make decisions. And so like I notice myself when I'm impatient, I'm like, like, are we good? Are you okay? Do you like, what do you need to make a decision?
yeah. Because that's what you've been taught and trained to do, is like,
Yes.
yeah, there's no time
Not
to,
even taught. It's just like you're thrown into it. You're like, figure it
there's no
out. I'm
other
like,
option.
okay, so like let's figure it out.
Wow, which is such, I mean, such a useful skill, like in that
Mm-hmm.
setting. But I can see how
For
when you're out
sure.
of that setting, you're like, it's okay. Like, we don't need to. There's
Totally.
no pressure here. I don't need to apply it myself.
Exactly. Exactly. Exactly.
Um, I I have like a theory a little bit too, that and I think I kind of
Yes.
touched on it at the very very start of our
Sure.
conversation, of like, I think a lot of creativity is really really isolating,
Mm.
and um in isolating, not as much as like a feeling, but like well, can be a feeling, but like I
Sure.
mean it like in a very like literal sense. Like, a lot of the times when you're
Mm.
being creative, even if you're collaborating with people, it's usually a smaller group,
Mm-hmm.
or like maybe a lot of origins of creativity are done on a more
Mm.
solo level.
Sure.
And I like I think especially in like a touring environment where like you are, either all sharing a bus, or you are like on
Mm-hmm.
top of each other for 3 months straight, and you don't really have that isolation. And it
Mm-hmm.
and I think at one point I kind of thought that was a solution to maybe feeling like
Sure.
isolated by your creativity, but I kind of feel like there has to be like a bridge that's built, because it's not like necessarily like natural. It almost, I feel like there has to be like maybe a little bit of a discrepancy, because you're
Mm.
being creative, but now all of a sudden you're with a ton of people, and like,
Yeah.
and I'm not even
Mm.
thinking of like, I mean, a tour manager is a creative position, of you're being
Totally.
creative with solutions. Every
Right.
single person in that world is a creative in some sort of sense.
Right. Right. Right.
And so like I think so much about why that can be so like odd to folks. But I
Mm-hmm.
want to start with like, why, or do you agree that a lot of creativity can
Sure.
feel isolating, and like, and if so, like, why do you think that is? And then we'll try to bridge
Mm.
it next, I guess.
Totally. I think I do agree with your theory. I think it's interesting. One, I appreciate that you even shouted out the fact that tour management is a creative act. I feel like for me, I've always been put into this organizational box. They're like, you, nerd, straight A's, type A,
Yeah,
organize things, keep things on track, like, and therefore are not creative.
yeah,
And I think that's something that like I've honestly struggled with my entire life, is like, okay, yeah, like I'm super organized, which definitely comes from anxiety, not anything else. It's not something I strive to do. It's just makes me feel better.
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
And then the reality is, the other side of that is that I mean, I went to art school my freshman year of college. I thought I was going to be a photographer from the time I was 6 until I was 19, until I got more involved in the music industry. And it's something I still love to do. But to your point, it's more about how can you put a creative lens on everything. And I think that's what's really interesting is people want to just put, again, I mean, it ties back to the beginning of the conversation. Everything needs to be in a box, and it needs to be neat, and it needs to be organized, and it's not, and that's scary.
Yeah. Because clarity is so much easier to accept than like a
Yes,
creative solution that maybe we don't know yet. Yeah.
exactly. And it just makes people uncomfortable. And I think it's interesting because, to your point, I mean, I think a lot of artists do need that alone time and solitude to be able to explore
Hmm.
and iterate and think. And that definitely does not happen on a tour bus or on a tour.
Yeah.
But I do think that there's different types of creativity that can happen in those in between moments when
Yeah.
you're on a drive in the middle of Montana on the same road for 7 hours and someone has the space to be like, dude, what do you think about this? And I've seen those moments,
Yeah.
and that's really beautiful. But it definitely, I think creativity can be a massively isolating thing if we let it. And I think that's part of the communal aspect that I know I'm missing immensely. And I know a lot of other folks are missing.
Yeah. Because you have experience working with a ton of different creatives, what what do you feel like something that somebody might be able to do if to kind of to build like a connection or a community with somebody that maybe instinctually has
Mm-hmm.
that like feeling of like, oh, like this is something I do like alone, like I write my music alone, or like I work on my
Sure.
screenplay alone, or I,
Totally.
you know, draw alone, whatever creative like kind of
Yeah, yeah,
field.
yeah.
What do you feel like is something that like somebody can do? Because it's tough, because it's like that is something so personal, so you have to walk that line so carefully.
Well, I think that's what it is that it's like it takes that extra level of vulnerability to be able to share what you're working on. And if you're
Yeah.
not ready yet, like you don't want to share it. I've had so many different business ideas, even creative ideas and projects and whatnot, that like I'll go off and I'll like make something. I'm like, huh, like I feel satisfied, like scratch the itch.
Yeah.
I'm good. And like I'll leave it around the house and my partner will be like, you made that? The fuck is that?
Yeah.
I'm like, it's fine. It's fine. Just put it in the trash. Everything's good.
Yeah.
And I think it's, for me at least, it's that extra level of vulnerability and like, what is the intention? Is it something that you want to put out and share with the world? Is it something that you just wanted to create just for the sake of creating? And I think that's the struggle now, is that it feels like everything needs to be monetized
Mm.
all the
Yeah.
time, and you can't even have a thought without thinking about how to sell it. And that's what's so like disappointing.
Yeah.
It's so frustrating.
Do you think that deters maybe a lot of people from prioritizing something maybe personal over something
100%.
economic?
Yeah, 100%. And there was so many times, especially when we had Level Exchange eventually went from an online platform to a physical co-working in a production space
Uh-huh.
that was in Rhode Island for a couple of years. And as much fun as we had doing photo shoots and video shoots and recordings and like the whole thing, that was amazing. Some of my favorite memories from that time were when we had no mic nights, and it was intentional networking events where I invited everyone. I spent a lot of time at this co-working space that was for social enterprise, and so because of that, I met attorneys, I met different people solving all sorts of these global global issues through social impact, through social
Hmm.
entrepreneurship. And I invited them. I invited a bunch of other folks I knew from the business community in Rhode Island. And then I invited all of the musicians that I knew and all of the photographers and the videographers and the studio engineers, and threw them all in a room. And our space was attached to a brewery, which didn't hurt.
Yeah.
And so it
Yeah.
was
Always helps a little.
all about just throw them in there
Yeah.
and see what happens. And by the end of the night, there was magical moments of, okay, great, some, a band was able to talk to someone who does business development and was finally able to be convinced that their band should start an LLC and be legit instead
Mm.
of continuing to get paid in cash under the table and perpetually, evade taxes,
Yeah.
versus other situations where, the guy who came in a super, super uptight suit and tie and the whole thing who's like, I'm Bob the accountant, is secretly in like a Leonard Skinner cover band. And you're like, let's go,
Yeah.
Bob. Let's talk. Like, let's talk about that, man.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I think that happened to me, you know, that was like a decade ago. And so to me, having those moments of like, oh, wow, like, yeah, Bob's business card says that he's an accountant, but also he's got all sort of cool stuff.
Yeah,
And like,
there's
he's
a
pretty
lot
damn
more to
good.
Bob than we thought. Yeah, and suddenly we're a lot more
Yes.
interested in Bob the accountant.
Exactly.
I think it reminds me of exactly what you said earlier of seeing people in their multifacetedness. But also
Totally.
the folks that, you know, that have been engaging with you in the communities that you're building, of saying like, I didn't even know like I needed this. And
Totally.
do you feel like it's like what, like why do we not think, or why are we always so surprised why we enjoy community? Because I feel like on the most surface level that exists,
Sure.
we like everybody kind of understands that like humans need connection.
Right. Sure.
And then we're diving a little bit below that surface of like, especially like creative people like need
Totally.
that's connection. So why are we always so surprised when we enjoy sharing something? And why is something so personal to me so much more enjoyable when it's shared with people? And why does a director love watching their film more when it's like when it's with a room of people enjoying it? Like
totally.
and like, why do we forget that so often?
Yes. These are the questions that keep me up at night and make me cry on most days.
Yeah.
Like, and that's what, you know, especially from, you know, the monetization standpoint, in terms of, you know, paying for my house standpoint, like community is not an easy business.
No.
I like generating revenue is honestly a joke in that capacity,
Sure.
but that's definitely not why I'm doing it. And I think separating those two things are super, super, super important. And I think that's honestly like, that's a conversation I have on a daily basis with people who are in super uptight corporate jobs and people who are on the complete opposite end of things, who are painters, they draw, they do photography, they're musicians, whoever. And both, it's almost like they go so far to the end of the spectrum and then they're coming back full circle, because everyone's complaining, at least to me, about the same thing.
Yeah.
They're like, fuck, you know, I have a bunch of money, but my soul and I'm dead inside, so that sucks. So it's really great that I'm loaded, but I don't enjoy my life. And then on the other side are it tends to be more creative people who are happy as all get out and they can't pay their bills.
Yeah.
And it's this weird thing of like, why don't we understand that art is a business is an art? We can exist with these two things. Our world, in my opinion, is inherently better when we value each other for those two things.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, what the hell would all these tech companies be if they didn't have kick-ass graphic designers in general,
Yep.
and artists on their team doing the visuals, doing the creative, doing the marketing, doing the advertising, all of those things. Like, and that's where, to me, that's where like the existential crisis kicks in, is like, I am having a very hard time following at what point in our short history it became so that the accountants are the most valued thing and everything else goes sideways. Or legal is, you know, you can make $700 an hour to do that, but if you're writing, you know, a world-changing song, you might make 7 cents. Like,
yeah, if it gets 1,000 plays. Yeah.
Yes, that.
And like, yeah, is that because of like the rise of independent artistry, and like, you know, like the labels used to be like the people just pumping money like into, you know, artists' bank account, and like now that that's kind of gone, like it feels a little bit more almost like all of like the I love a metaphor, almost like we were bowling with the oh my god, what the like what do you call
like
it,
the
the
gutters?
gut, or like, yeah, the
No.
the
What are they
the
called?
things that pop up, the
Yep. With you.
yes, okay, I'm gonna think about it the second we finish this, watch. The like, yeah, those like little gate things that pop up.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna be stuck on thinking of what that is. But like, it almost, we were like bowling with that before, but now that they're gone, like the chances to miss are so much like more.
Sure.
But like the satisfaction of a strike is so much better when you're not bowling with the I thought it was gonna roll right off my tongue again, but
I thought it
you're
was
both,
too.
yeah,
No,
without the things.
I don't know, man. I spend a lot of time thinking about this, and I don't have any of the answers. I have a whole hell of a lot more questions, but I think it's especially now in this internet centric world where literally anybody can seemingly do anything as long as you have a computer with internet
Yeah,
access, we're still running into the same problems. And it's like, it's not like it's any better. It might be a little easier, but it's the same commodification of stuff, except instead of like having to go out and spend 7 hours doing physical labor, now I'm hunched over for 7 hours, clickety clacking,
hmm,
getting carpal tunnel. So it's like,
yeah,
what did we really, I don't know, what did we really get out of that? And I just think that there's so many better opportunities and better ways of being able to do whatever this thing is that us
yeah,
humans are doing.
yeah,
And I think that that comes when you bring wildly diverse groups of people together. And that's always been the goal of the Mobile Social Club and the goal of the podcast. I mean, the all the folks who have been on the podcast thus far are those are people that I speak to frequently. I consider 99% of them friends.
yeah,
And if you look, I mean, even scrolling through quickly on the folks that have been on, I mean, every single age, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, like you name it,
yeah,
those are the people that I talk to on a daily basis. And sometimes it's very confusing because I'm like, whoa, I can see this one thing from 800 perspectives, which is, I think, why I also loved photography so
hmm,
much, because I could show people my perspective,
yeah,
even though there's 8,000 other ways I could take a photo. And I just think that the more exposure we get to different people, places, things, cultures, all the things, we could do better. But instead, it's the tech bros are doing the tech bro thing, and the musicians do the musician thing, and the artists do the artist thing, and the marketers do the marketer thing. And it's just like, cool, but what happens when you smash them all together?
yeah.
I want to see more of that.
And that should excite us more than it terrifies us.
Yes, exactly. Everything is out of that scarcity. But like if we do it different, then we don't know what the result is going to
Yeah,
be, and that's what sucks. Is like imagine how much more interesting. I mean, it could be technology, it could be music, it could be art, it could be different businesses, it could be solutions to all the world's problems that could come out of it if people felt safe enough to do so.
yeah,
And I mean, I know it's difficult to be creative and to come up with interesting ideas and to have a good life when you're like, shit, like I'm having a really great time. And then all of a sudden you have this panic moment of like, but yep, it's almost time to pay mortgage. It's almost time to pay rent.
yeah,
And it snaps you right out of it.
yeah. God, every single question that I just want to ask you starts with how, because everything that you're describing sounds like yeah, like I just think so many people I know I think would be so much happier with that, or like
Mm,
there's so many creative people that I know that I'm like I just like if there was something that I could do to like just make you feel like if like you couldn't fall, like no, like even if you
totally.
tried to, like you would not be able to fail.
Totally.
I just think like what a creative space and just amazing.
100%.
Like I don't because I I feel most creative when I'm inspired by other people's creativity, and it just and
Totally.
like oh my god, I feel like any success in creative like areas just is not
Mm,
like a net zero like thing or a net I think that's
totally.
net zero sum
Right.
kind of thing. It's like we are everybody benefits when more
Right.
people are more creative. So yeah, I
Agreed.
you said that just so perfectly. But
I think it's not sorry to cut you
no,
off. I
please.
think the only point that I want to make before transitioning is that there's it's not I don't think that it's a lack of creativity, and I don't think it's a lack of space for creativity. I think it's a lack of translation of skills and creating understanding. Because and that's what I noticed. That was one of the biggest things that blew my mind at the beginning of the pandemic, when all of my music, my production, my tour manager, colleagues, friends, acquaintances, anything I saw online once, COVID hit and the music industry shut down and the live entertainment industry shut down, everyone was like, what do I do?
Yeah.
In their heads, they're like, but I only know how to do this. I only know how to tour manage. I only know how to production manage. I only know how to do front of house. When the reality is like, bro, That skill set can be applied to so many things. And I beat my head up against the wall because, again, anytime anyone looks at my resume, they're like, okay, so you tour manage? Like, they think just like sex and drugs and rock and roll. And
Yeah.
I don't know if we want to hire this person. They don't realize the tangible skills. So then it becomes my job to then translate that.
Wow. Yeah.
And I think it's the same thing. And I deeply struggle with that. It's not something that I've figured out, but it's just like, there's so many different definitions of entrepreneurship. I have two.
Okay.
One would be making something out of nothing is entrepreneurship. One definition that we can work with. The other side of it, because I think entrepreneurship is something that's been very dramatically glorified, especially over the last 10 years.
Yeah.
It's just hustle and grind and go. And like, I'm going to exit and I'm going to sell my company for $1 billion and I'm going to be rich. And it's like, cool. That's so, like, if you really want to do that, then go and do that. But do you want to do that, or do you just want to have money? Because there might be other ways to do that. I'm just saying.
Yeah, there's different things.
But I think there's this weird line of like, every single creative person, every single musician, artist that I know is inherently entrepreneurial. Does that mean that they look at themselves like that? Absolutely not. Most musicians that I know are like, they'll shred on a guitar. They've got pipes for days. And I'm like, dude, what? And they're like, what? Like, it wasn't hard. Like, what? Are you kidding me? So there's one side of being like entrepreneurial that I think exists. And I think on the other is like hardcore entrepreneurs, which I would define as somebody who's built a sustainable business that if they fell off the face of the earth or they disappeared, they'd still have gazillions of dollars going to their bank account.
Yeah.
Because they created something that runs by itself. So I think there's a big differentiation between being self-employed, which I think you are, I am, and we're out here and we're attempting to do a thing, versus, and there's a lot of musicians are self-employed. They're out there, they're taking gigs, they're trying to do their own tours, they're making music, they're doing their thing, they're hiring a bunch of independent contractors to produce and to record and to write and to do the thing, versus when you get to I mentioned Elton John earlier, when you're at an Elton John level, he's making money 24/7 because of all of the infrastructure and the business that has been put in place around him as an entity, as a business. And I think those are more nuanced conversations that, like, the internet is so big and yet there's no room for nuance, apparently. It has to be one thing or the other.
Yeah. Do you think that a creative needs to be entrepreneurial? Because it sounds like you're almost saying there's a difference between being an entrepreneur as your oh my god, it almost feels contradictory to me to say like your title, because we're like talking about undefining things.
But that's what I'm saying. There's so much nuance to it, and I just think that artists are inherently entrepreneurial. It's more so, you're one of few people who I know that is an artist but also does the management side of things and can wear both hats. And I think a lot of people can, and you can do it successfully. You're one of them.
Because as you're saying, I just think there are transferable skills, and maybe that's what we need to focus on more. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's what I'm saying is like your energy goes wherever you're focusing. And so focusing on skills-based things, I would love to see a universe in which that's where we're going. We're focusing on what are the things that I can do with the skills that I have. And if I want to do something else, is there a gap in the skills in order to be able to do that thing? Is it a chasm where you're going to get hurt or hurt someone else?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of jobs, both, desk jobs and not, where people could potentially like seriously be hurt, injured, or negatively impacted. So, you're not going to go into being a medical doctor from being a musician. Like that's not there. I'm, so good at problem solving doesn't mean I can perform open heart surgery.
It takes different skills. Yeah.
But I think if we focus more on skills and building that portfolio of skills, especially now where you can work from anywhere, you can do anything, we'll figure it out. Those are the things that I spend time thinking about.
Oh my God. I love that. Again, I have so many follow-up questions, but I want to ask you, because I'm really excited to hear your answer I always like to kind of end the conversation in the show on the same sort of question, because a lot of the issue I have with a lot of similar forms of media, kind of like the show of like conversations as a resource.
Totally.
It's a vague way to describe it, but is oftentimes like I'll listen to it, I'll consume it, and then it ends, and I don't really know what the takeaway was, or like,
Sure.
or I struggle to apply something to my life, because I'm like, I can be inspired, but it's that translating like inspiration to action
Yeah.
that is really
100%.
difficult for me to do. So somebody just spent, the hour or so listening to our conversation
Sure.
and learning so much from you about, focusing on your skill and how to maybe be more comfortable with finding a spot in a community or even creating your own, and
Totally.
why that's of value. If somebody has another hour right now, either right now or maybe, next week or this weekend or next day they have off or whatever it is.
Yeah.
What do you think? And you can be specific to maybe somebody in similar shoes to you or me or just in general. If they have if they have an hour somewhere, what's something that they can do to feel like they made use of that hour and maybe got them even just a small step closer to whatever their goal may be?
Totally. And I think, well, you just hit the nail on the head. It's a small step, and it's not about an hour. It's about what is the smallest executable step that you can take to get you closer. I think, and I do this myself. I paralyze myself consistently. I'm like, oh, I really want to do this big lofty thing, but yeah, maybe in like 10 years that'll happen. That's cool. When the reality is, right now I want to figure out a way to grow. I'll use a personal example. I would love to work on my podcast 24/7.
Yeah.
Like if I could do that 24/7, 365, I would be so stoked. And I can focus on, okay, well, we only have a couple thousand listeners right now, and like we don't have that big of a social media following. I could focus on all of those things. Or what I finally got out of my own way and started doing the other day was, what is, Lindsey, the actual smallest executable step? How are people going to find out about this? You screaming into a void on TikTok? Probably not. You talking to people? Yup.
Yeah.
You like talking to people? Yup. Okay, so where do you find new people to talk to? The internet. Okay, so I literally spent some time, less than an hour, and I went on and I was like, all right, what podcasts are like mine? Okay, great. Made a list. What podcasts of those have decent social followings? Okay, great. Made a list. Which one of those has the most similarities? Okay, great. Went to their latest post, looked at the 10 people who commented on it, since obviously they're super excited about it, and sent them a message. Hey, I saw you like this podcast. You might like this one. Hope you have a great day. Bye.
Wow. Yeah.
Was that hard? No. Was it terrifying? Absolutely.
but it makes so much sense though. Like, and
I know.
it sounds one way, but then you also think about it like, oh, like somebody sharing content that you'll probably like. I think there's worse things than that.
Totally. And what's the worst case scenario? Someone like blocks me, tells me to fuck off. Like, I've heard worse. Okay.
It's okay.
Great.
Then
that's okay.
Then maybe,
do you need a hug?
Yeah.
Probably.
But then maybe your show wasn't the best for them, and then that's okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Although I do think your show is
so
good for everybody, but I don't think there is somebody out there that it's not good for. But that's I love that you kind of approach that with a sense of like not taking things super personally, but also like there's something so respectable about being like kind of bold and
totally.
And it's so funny to me because like I do things so much more bold than sending a DM like every single day, but for some reason that is a lot more scary.
It's so scary. It is scary. And I think the other thing too is like, especially I'm going to assume a lot of creatives and a lot of musicians in particular are listeners of yours. It's so much of it is anxiety. And I watch some of my artist friends get caught in that anxiety. And they're like, but like, how am I going to fill a stadium? I'm like, you haven't even sold out a 200 cap room. So like, let's dial it back and figure out what we're going to do. It's like, how are you going to, first of all, like work backwards. Do you have a show on the books? Okay, great. Is it sold out? No? Okay, great. You better start getting people there.
Yeah.
Like work backwards. And even in startups and tech and business, it comes down to like, can you send a note to someone? Can you send someone a LinkedIn request? And can you see just something to get the ball in motion? Because if not, I spend a lot of days just being like, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? When it literally 24 hours of what do I do versus 24 seconds of click, 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 send.
Done. Yeah.
Done.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. I've been trying to challenge myself lately to do like just one bold thing a day. One thing that at the end of the day I go like, hey, at least I did that today. Like that was
Exactly.
something that,
100%.
just was maybe just slightly ambitious over my normal level of ambition to
Yes.
make me feel more and more comfortable doing those things. So
Totally.
I love that piece of advice. And there's so much that I'm going to take away from this conversation. I'm actually so excited to go back, and I mean, this conversation is going to take no editing, but I'm really excited to go back and like listen, because I know there's things that you said that I did not pick up on. And so I encourage everybody just to like rewind, start listening to this conversation from the very beginning. Because
We can
Lindsey,
chat anytime.
okay, great. Because I'm gonna call you right when this ends. Apparently, thank you so much. I know your time is so valuable, and you spend it so wisely, and so it's really meaningful that you want to spend this time with me and to share your wisdom with everybody listening. So, thank you so much. I'm so excited to see all that you do, and honestly, like one of my highlights of the entire year that I've had is joining and finding community in the community that you created. And like I think it has so much to do with like, especially just being like New York, especially a city that's like, you just think it's so easy to find community, but like it can be really difficult. And I think I'm just so great, so grateful that there are people like you creating those spaces where like it's two things. It's so easy to become involved, and it's so easy to feel like you belong. And I do feel like those two things are critical to longevity and feeling comfortable in those spaces. So thank you so much.
That was good.
And
thank you.
I love that you want to be a part of other people's communities too, because I think that just goes to show the incredible person that you are. And maybe I'll record a whole side episode where I talk about how amazing you are. But anyway, thank you again for your time. Really appreciate it. We're going to plug everything in the intro and the outro of the show. So please, everybody listening, go listen to Lindsey's podcast. Join her at an event. I will probably see you there because really it's the best way you can use your time.
Thank you.
So Lindsey, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. You're the best.
Thanks for joining me today on Groundbreaking. If you're like me and want to be a part of Lindsey's community online or in person, just check the social links in the description to follow her and keep up with all of her incredible work. Be sure to stay tuned for more next time on the show. And as always, be sure to rate and comment on the show from wherever you're listening. You can also connect with me at Jake Brewer Music across all social channels and see more of what Friendly's up to at Friendly Media or by visiting friendlymedia.com. That's FRNDLY Media. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next time for more Groundbreaking.